Keanu Reeves walks into a fancy jewelry event. He's not wearing a tuxedo or a fancy suit. He doesn't have a big group of people with him. He's just wearing a simple necklace made of a stone on a leather string. People laugh at him, ignore him, and tell him he doesn't belong there. But what they don't know is that Keanu isn't just there to look at jewelry. He's there to test them. And when the truth comes out, it will change everything. The morning sun shines softly through the curtains in a quiet hotel room high above the Dubai city. The room was calm and simple, almost like the world outside had stopped for a moment. The warm desert wind moved the palm trees outside, and it promised another fancy day in the rich city. Keanu Reeves stood alone in front of a mirror. He wasn't wearing a fancy jacket or a watch. He was just wearing a soft shirt and simple pants, looking relaxed and confident. He had a look in his eyes like he had lived through many things deeper than time itself. On the table beside him, there was a small wooden box. It was old and worn around the edges. Keanu opened the box carefully, and inside was a thin leather cord with a light green stone hanging on it. The stone wasn't shiny, it didn't sparkle, but it felt heavy, not because it was expensive but because it held memories. Keanu picked up the necklace gently as if it could break. The words of a little girl named Nadia echoed in his mind. She was from a village in Kenya. Her eyes were bright, even though her heart was sick. Keanu met her during a quiet visit to help people, far from cameras and news. When it was time for him to leave, Nadia gave him the stone, saying, "It's not expensive, but it's full of love." Keanu smiled softly and put the necklace on, letting the stone rest gently against his chest. It was cool against his skin. He adjusted his collar to hide the necklace just a little, as he wanted it to be hidden. Then he looked at himself one last time and said softly, not to the mirror but to Nadia, "Let's see if they still remember what love looks like." There were no cameras waiting outside, no big crowd, no one announcing him. It was just Keanu stepping out into the world, carrying nothing but the stone and everything it meant. He walked into the Dubai Exhibition Center, which looked like a palace made of glass and gold. Inside, everything seemed to sparkle. This was a place for the wealthiest people in the world to show off their expensive jewelry. But Keanu didn't fit in. He wore no tuxedo, no diamond pin. He just had on a white shirt, simple pants, and a worn leather necklace. At the front desk, two women stood behind a clean white counter. One was typing on a tablet, and the other looked up slowly when she saw him. She smiled, but her smile didn't feel real. She said, "Sir, deliveries go through the back entrance." Keanu didn't mind and just nodded. "I'm here for the Grace collection," he said. The woman blinked. The other woman looked him up and down, from his shoes to his shirt, and noticed the necklace. She repeated, "East Pavilion. VIP access only." She seemed unsure. "Do you have a pass?" she asked, like she was saying, "Do you belong here?" Keanu calmly replied, "I was told I could walk through now." The two women looked at each other as if deciding whether or not to let him in. Finally, one woman said, "We've had problems with people sneaking in before the displays are open. The West Wing has the displays if you're just browsing." Keanu didn't react. He just said, "Thank you," and walked away. But the women looked at him differently now. In the Sapphire Pavilion, the energy was high. Cameras flashed and journalists surrounded the designers. At the center was the Grace collection, a display of perfect gemstones. This was Keanu's project, his dream. He stepped closer to admire a pair of rings made from old emerald pieces that had been thrown away but were now turned into beautiful jewelry. That's when Emma Deers saw him. Emma worked for one of the top jewelry companies in Europe. She noticed Keanu and how his shirt was slightly wrinkled. She saw the necklace and then looked at his shoes. They were leather, but they looked worn, not like fancy shoes. She walked over to him, her steps firm. "Excuse me," she said, her voice polite but sharp. "This section is for special guests only. May I ask why you're here?" Keanu answered calmly, "I'm just here to see the collection." Emma stared at his necklace, then said, "Interesting choice. It's very rustic." She smiled, but it wasn't kind. One of her helpers laughed quietly. Another whispered, "He looks like a yoga teacher who took the wrong turn." Emma stepped closer and said, "This area is for special guests only. It's not for just walking around." Keanu nodded, "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just wanted to see what Grace looks like in a place like this." Emma stared at him for a moment, then spoke to a nearby security guard, saying loudly for others to hear, "Please help this gentleman. He's clearly not where he's supposed to be." The guard walked over, not being rude but clearly wanting him to leave. "We need to keep the atmosphere here," he said. Keanu turned to leave. As he walked away, he saw his reflection in a glass case. His simple necklace looks blurry behind all the shiny diamonds. He quietly walked out of the room, but the people in the room kept laughing at him. Emma, the woman who thought she was protecting Grace, stood taller, proud that she had done her job. The crowd soon forgot about Keanu. They went back to their fancy drinks and polite clapping, like nothing had happened. But something had. A man had quietly walked into their world with nothing but love and was quietly erased. Emma felt a sense of pride as she stood there, enjoying the approval of those around her. She had just done something small, but it had made everyone agree with her. The security guard who had helped her handle the situation was standing by the wall, calm and relaxed, knowing his job was finished. Everything seemed to return to normal, except for one thing: Keanu Reeves. Keanu was sitting quietly on a marble bench, far from the center of the room where the jewelry displays and guests were gathered. The soft glow of lights and the buzzing chatter about wealth and status surrounded him. He looked relaxed, but there was something about his posture that suggested something was bothering him. The room was full of conversations about price tags, designer brands, and who was wearing what, but none of that seemed to matter to Keanu. What bothered him wasn't the loud voices or rude comments. It was something more invisible and hurtful, the way people judged him based only on what he wore. No one had asked his name or cared to know his story. Instead, people looked at his clothes and decided in seconds that he was unimportant. He wasn't wearing a fancy suit or any known brand. He didn't belong here, they thought, simply because he didn't fit their idea of what someone in this place should look like. It didn't matter that he had come from a world different from theirs, one where luxury and polished appearances didn't matter. In their eyes, he was invisible. He was just another person who didn't fit their mold. But one person had noticed him: Zoe Malik. She had seen everything from across the room. Zoe wasn't standing in the middle of the crowd, mingling with the wealthy and important guests. Instead, she was at the edge of the room, standing where people like her were supposed to stay, those with talent but without the right connections or the famous family names. She wasn't wearing expensive designer shoes or jewelry that sparkled. She was dressed in a simple, borrowed gown, and her heart was pounding in her chest as she nervously adjusted the display of her designs. This was her big moment, the first time she had the chance to showcase her work under the Grace collection, and she had poured everything into making this dream come true. As she worked, adjusting the arrangement of jewelry pieces, she heard Emma's voice cut through the air. It was sharp and cutting, her words filled with a tone of superiority. Emma was talking about the man who had been escorted out of the event, dismissing him as a wanderer, and mocking the necklace he was wearing. Emma made sure everyone could hear her opinion, saying things like, "Not where he's supposed to be," and calling him a flea market visitor. Zoe's curiosity sparked, and she turned her head to see what was going on. When she saw him, tall, quiet, and composed, with a faraway look in his eyes, Zoe's heart skipped a beat. She felt something deep in her chest when she saw the necklace he was wearing. It wasn't just any necklace, it was special. Zoe had seen that stone before. It wasn't some fake imitation or a mass-produced version. This was the real thing, the one she had helped carve as a teenager at St. Miriam's Children's Shelter. She remembered it clearly, the stone with its green hue, the tiny chip on the left side, and the delicate hand-carved marking near the base. Only 3 of these stones had been made, and Zoe had never known who received them until now. The man who had just been mocked by Emma and others wasn't just anyone. He was the same person who had quietly funded the clean water system at Zoe's school, the one who had helped build the library that had opened up a whole new world for her. Without him, she might never have learned to read or even had a safe place to sleep. He had done all of this without asking for recognition or attention. And yet, here he was, being humiliated by people who didn't even know his true value. Zoe felt a wave of anger rise in her chest. How could they be so cruel, so dismissive, just because he wasn't wearing expensive clothes or flashy accessories? How could they treat someone who had done so much good for others as if he were invisible? Her fists clenched at her sides, but she didn't rush to confront Emma or shout at the people in the room. Instead, she took a deep breath and realized something. She understood why the man hadn't spoken up. He hadn't come here to be recognized or applauded. He had come to test the industry, to see if the world of wealth and luxury could recognize grace and kindness without the spotlight. And they had failed miserably. They hadn't seen the true value in the man standing at the edge of the room. But that didn't seem to matter to him. He wasn't here to be praised or noticed. He was simply sitting, carrying the weight of all that he had quietly given to the world. Zoe didn't pity him. She felt something deeper: respect. This man had endured the cruelty and dismissiveness of the crowd, and he hadn't said a word. It was as if his silence spoke louder than anything the rest of them could say. He had shown Zoe, through his endurance, that grace could be carried quietly, without a need for recognition or applause. As Zoe watched him from across the room, Emma continued to speak to her colleague. She was laughing too loudly, trying to make herself the center of attention. But Zoe could hear the annoyance in her voice as she talked about the man who had been kicked out. That man, Emma muttered, came in here like he thought this was some flea market. Her colleague nodded politely, unsure of what to say. Emma glanced over at the man sitting quietly across the room, still wearing the necklace that had changed Zoe's life. Security should really be doing a better job, Emma added, her voice full of disdain. We're not here to entertain people who don't belong here. She said it like it was a joke, but there was no humor in her words. Zoe stood still, her heart heavy with the weight of what Emma had said. Her anger boiled up again, and this time she couldn't stop herself. Emma's words felt like a slap to her face. It wasn't just the way she had dismissed the man, it was the way everyone else in the room had followed along without question. They had all ignored him. They had all cared more about the sparkle of the jewelry and the names on the invitation than the real meaning behind the event. Zoe could see it clearly now. This wasn't about grace. It wasn't about talent or creativity. It was about knowing the right people, wearing the right things, and making sure everyone in the room knew who you were. The show wasn't really about what mattered. It was about who you were seen with, who you could impress, and who you could ignore. As Emma continued to talk, Zoe noticed a few guests whispering to each other. One older woman leaned toward Emma and asked, "Do you know who that man is?" Emma just shrugged and laughed. "No idea," she said. "Probably someone trying to sneak in for a photo op." She took a sip of wine and turned toward the security guard. "Can you make sure he leaves?" she asked loudly. "We don't want him reappearing in the press gallery later." The guard hesitated. "He's just sitting there, not bothering anyone," he said, but Emma wasn't listening. Her face hardened, and she sneered as she looked at the man again. "That necklace he's wearing is embarrassing," she said coldly. "This is a jewelry summit, not a place for something like that." Her words rang in the air, and the room seemed to fall silent. All eyes were on her. But Emma didn't notice the stares or the shocked faces around her. She didn't realize that, while she had been speaking, the rest of the room had begun to see the truth. It wasn't the man in the corner who was out of place. It was her. She didn't care. Across the room, Keanu heard it. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. He knew that voice. That sharp, judgmental tone always came right before someone thought they could treat someone badly because they didn't think they could fight back. He kept his hands calmly in his lap, his fingers gently touching the stone that now felt warmer than it had all morning. Zoe had never liked attention. She was the kind of person who liked to draw quietly in the back of the classroom, letting others talk while she quietly worked. Her art always spoke louder than her name, and that's how she liked it. But now the words "tribal showcase" still hung in the air. Something changed. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about him, and the stone he wore, and the silence that made people feel like it was okay to treat others poorly. She stepped away from where she was standing, walking through the middle of the room like a loose thread pulling away from silk. Her steps were steady, but her chest felt tight. She didn't know what she was going to say, only that it had to be said. Emma had started laughing again, trying to cover up her rude words with more charm. But even Emma seemed to feel something change. The room's temperature felt different. People were watching, waiting. Zoe didn't stop until she stood between Emma and the glass display of the Grace collection. "I know that necklace," she said clearly, her voice shaking just a little. Emma blinked, surprised. "Excuse me?" Zoe turned to the guests who were now gathering around them in a quiet circle. "That stone," she said louder now, pointing across the room at Keanu, "is Nakuru greenstone carved by hand. Only 3 of them were ever made." She looked at Emma and said, "And they were never sold. They were given to people who saved lives." The room went silent quickly. Zoe moved aside, letting everyone see the man sitting alone near the corner of the room. For a moment, the crowd looked at him differently. His posture wasn't messy, it was calm, patient, and watchful. A woman in the back gasped quietly, and someone whispered to their partner. The feeling in the room changed like a ripple spreading out. Emma, pale now, looked again at Keanu. She loosened her grip on her wine glass. "No," she whispered. "That's not." But it was. Zoe's voice cut through the quiet again, softer now but stronger than before. "You called it a souvenir, but I carved that stone myself years ago in a shelter that man helped fund. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him." She looked directly at Keanu now. "I've never seen your face, but I've seen your work. We all have." Finally, Keanu looked up. He wasn't angry or smug, just calm. He gave a small, knowing nod as if to say, "Now they see." And for the first time that day, he didn't look out of place. Keanu stood up slowly. He didn't rush. He didn't make any big gestures. He just stood up as calm as before, and the room seemed to understand. Voices stopped mid-sentence. People changed how they were sitting. Glasses were set down without even thinking. It was like the air knew something big was about to happen. He looked across the crowd. His eyes were steady, not too hard, not too soft, just knowing. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but in the silence, it felt louder than thunder. You praised the idea of grace, he said slowly. You hung it from the ceiling. You printed it on brochures. You poured it into crystal and gold. He gently touched the small green stone against his chest and said, but when it walked into this room, worn by someone who didn't shine, you called it a joke. No one moved. No one dared to speak. Emma's eyes were wide now, filled with shock, but she couldn't look away. Keanu turned a little, not accusing anyone, but letting them know they were all included. I came here not to be seen, he said, but to see if the message we built this on, dignity without diamonds, value without applause, meant something when it wasn't dressed in attention. He paused and let the silence answer for them. And what I saw is that we still haven't learned. He took a slow step forward, not toward Emma, but toward Zoe. He looked at her with quiet gratitude, nothing fancy, just two people who understood that some truths are carried quietly, not shouted out loud. Then he turned back to the crowd. This stone, he said, lifting it gently, was the last thing a little girl had. And she gave it to me not because of who I was, but because I stayed. A ripple of emotion spread through the room. Some people gasped, others lowered their eyes. You called it cheap, he added, his voice still steady but getting sharper, like the truth was cutting through. You called it out of place. What does that say about where we are if this, he held up the stone, isn't welcome? He let the question hang in the air for a moment before slowly lowering the necklace under his shirt. I'm not here to shame you, he said. But if this is how you treat a stranger, imagine what you've missed when no one was watching. And then came the sentence that hit everyone like a stone in the heart. Some things aren't meant to shine. They're meant to endure. He stepped back, not to leave, but to let the silence speak for itself. And the silence did. It was louder than any applause could ever be. Are you still here with us? Keanu asked. If you're still watching, drop a number 8 in the comments so we know you're here right now experiencing this moment with us. We see you and we're glad you stayed. Emma couldn't move her feet. They felt stuck to the marble floor. Her whole body felt like it was shaking, and there was a strange feeling in the room like heat slowly rising. Her throat felt dry, and her hands were shaking just enough for the wine glass she was holding to tap softly against her ring. The sound was so quiet, but it felt so loud, and no one spoke. Everyone in the room was feeling something. It wasn't just Emma who felt exposed, it was everyone. The guests who had turned their backs on her, the assistants who had walked away, and the managers who had stayed quiet and said nothing. Keanu stood still in the middle of the room, but it wasn't just him that changed. It was the space around him. People didn't move away from him, but they moved away from themselves. There was a man across the room who had taken photos of Emma earlier. He slowly put his phone down. Near the champagne bar, a jewelry executive who had been laughing just a moment ago now ran his finger around the rim of his glass, looking down like he was trying to forget what he had seen. No one had told them to feel ashamed, but they did. They were ashamed because they had seen something important but didn't understand it. Emma took a deep breath, but it was hard. She tried to say the things she always said to charm people, but it didn't work this time. Not here. Not after everything that had just happened. I didn't know, she whispered. Keanu turned to her. He didn't try to help, but he looked at her like he looked at everyone else. That's exactly the problem, he said. Zoe, who was standing nearby, didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Just standing next to Keanu was enough. Her calm eyes made her presence speak louder than any words could. Zoe had also been ignored before, so she understood. Now, for the first time, Emma truly saw Zoe, not as a junior designer, not as someone from a poor background, but as someone who had helped open everyone's eyes to the truth. Behind them, a spoon clinked softly against the glass. It was an accident, but it felt loud, like it was marking the end of something. The room took a deep breath. Keanu's expression didn't change, but his words came out softer. This room, this industry, this moment, it doesn't need more diamonds. It needs more eyes that know how to see. He didn't say anything more. There was nothing else to say. He simply turned and walked toward the exit, not in a hurry, not trying to make a big statement. He just left with what he came for, the truth. Emma stood off to the side. She wasn't completely destroyed, but she was changed. She realized there would be time for apologies later, but not yet. Because today, her voice wasn't the one the room needed to hear. Later that evening, when most of the guests had left and the excitement had calmed down, Zoe sat alone in the far corner of the exhibit. The lights were dimmer and the music had stopped. In her hand, she was holding the green stone that Keanu had left for her. He hadn't made a big speech or a big deal out of it. He had just handed it to her with a simple line, "It deserves to be seen." Zoe turned the stone over in her hands, feeling the rough edges she had helped shape. It didn't feel like something from a poor place anymore. It didn't feel like something to be given away or pitted. It felt like a promise, something that had waited for the world to see its worth. She walked to the display case, took out a necklace she had made, and gently placed the green stone in its place. There was no spotlight on it, no big announcement, just a simple presentation. A week later, a new exhibit opened in the same space. It was smaller and quieter than the last one, but unforgettable. In the center of the room was a necklace with the green stone on a leather cord. The stand it was on was made from reclaimed wood, and above it was a black plaque with 12 words, "Given with nothing, carried with everything, worn where kindness belongs." It wasn't the most expensive thing in the room, but it was the one that everyone stopped to look at. People didn't walk past it without noticing it. Keanu never came back to the exhibit. He didn't need to. Because once people see grace, it doesn't need a round of applause. It doesn't need to shine or have attention. It just needs to be seen. This isn't just a story about a man with a stone. It's a reminder that kindness, even if no one notices it, is still kindness. Humility is stronger than applause. The real question is, did we see it or did we look away? If this story made you think, don't just scroll past. Like this story to show you still believe in quiet strength. Share it with someone who needs to remember what true grace looks like, and follow for more stories that speak to the heart. Let's keep these stories alive because sometimes the smallest moments leave the biggest marks. If you like this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling adventures, mysteries, and unforgettable moments. Your support keeps these stories alive and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching. I can't wait to see you in the next video.